Konnichiwa.
It's history in the making, and we want you to be part of it.
That's a given.
Talking about people who are changing the game.
You guys have run a tight ship here. Oh my gosh.
The rock star sitting here.
I can't even describe it.
Talking about actual business.
Two beings at the top of their professions.
Started.
Lightning quick movements.
Changing
The rock star sitting here. It's just started.
That's right, and good morning, my friends. Welcome back to the Real Value Podcast, the podcast about real estate appraising, lending, marketing, success, and, well, how it all fits together. My name is Blaine Feyen. I am your host for this and every episode of the Real Value Podcast. It is my great pleasure to be back with you again this week. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Real Value Podcast and for all of you who've been subscribing in droves over the last couple months. I really appreciate everybody who listens, who downloads, who passes it on, talks about it on social media, of course, and, of course, subscribes. We have had record numbers each week since our reboot just a few short months ago, and makes me feel really good. I really appreciate you tuning in, listening, and, of course, all of the feedback. I have some great interactions with people on social media and via email, and I have to say that's kind of why I do it. It really gives me great pleasure to have those conversations and network and meet new people, meet like-minded appraisers, and people from other industries. I've had lenders from around the country sending me emails saying that somehow it ended up on their feed, and they tuned in, listened in, and loved the message. So I really appreciate that. I would like to give a special shout out before we go on with our topic today to the appraiser coach Dustin Harris for so graciously having me on the Appraiser Coach podcast. We did an interview last week. I'm not sure when it will be out, but we had a great chat about, of course, podcasting. We are both mutual podcasters in this industry. We, of course, talked about the appraisal industry. We did talk some martial arts, as many of you know if you've listened to any of the episodes. I am an Aikido longtime Aikido teacher. I also do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We didn't talk about that at all, but it, of course, adds to my background. We did talk about some other fun stuff, the appraisal industry, appraising in today's climate, so on and so forth. So if you aren't a subscriber of Dustin's podcast, be sure to head over there and subscribe to that one when it comes out. Of course, Dustin puts out great content every week, so there's at least 51 other reasons to subscribe to the Appraiser Coach podcast, not just to listen to me. I also get a lot of value from the Appraiser Coach All-Star Team, which is the private Facebook group and monthly newsletter. And again, this is not a sponsored plug. None of the Real Value Podcast is sponsored. I just like putting out honest commentary on where I receive value and also other people making a difference in our industry. And nobody can argue that the Appraiser Coach Dustin Harris hasn't created tremendous value in our industry and continues to do so. So thank you very much, Dustin. Really appreciate it. The title of today's show, You're Not That Good. What does it mean? Well, to explain what I mean by that statement, I have to take you back, say 25 years or so to Chicago, Illinois, when I was taking part in an intense leadership and personal development program that I've talked about many times in other episodes, whereby I was colloquially called a live-in student. I lived in a martial arts and Zen monastery, so to speak, an academy, and studied Aikido and Zen meditation full-time for several years. At the time, I was a 21-year-old kid learning about life in the big city, how to manage an 18 to 20-hour day schedule filled with tons of physical training, meditation training, very hardcore meditation training, by the way. Traveling all over the city and the suburbs, teaching Aikido classes, and simply learning how to be a good student, how to be a good apprentice. And this is an important concept. It was a grueling schedule physically, especially for a 21-year-old kid, but even more so emotionally. Part of a program like that, much like I would guess a military boot camp, is to break down the student in almost every way possible, to strip you of your ego, and to expose your weaknesses. And you might be physically very capable of lots of abuse throughout the day, but after multiple 18 to 20-hour days of being pushed and taxed to your absolute limit, eventually you crack and you reveal some kind of weakness. You just can't hold it together all the time. It might be some kind of breakdown in your attitude. It might be an immature quick response to somebody or something in your environment. We've all experienced these things. It literally could be a full-on breakdown where you storm off the Aikido mat, you break down emotionally in private. We saw this on a very regular basis when people were pushed to their limits physically, psychologically, and emotionally. And by the way, I'm not necessarily advocating for or against this kind of training. It goes on every day all around the world in some form or fashion. But I'm just telling you the story of my experience with that kind of training. For me, it was absolutely what was needed for me at the time of my life. Not because I was some kind of discipline case or had behavior issues. In fact, I had already been living on my own in my first real estate investment for the past several years. I was working quite diligently in a family business. I basically had my shit together for a 21-year-old, at least compared to many of my friends who were off partying at college. I would say I was on a fairly stable, good path and hadn't really experienced up to that point in my life some kind of what I call an ego shredding experience that the living in an Aikido and a Zen dojo or academy was about to deliver to me. And what I mean by that is that many people go through their life never really exposing themselves to uncomfortable situations. Most people just based purely on human nature and the kind of built-in desire to avoid pain and displeasure and discomfort will make daily, weekly, and monthly decisions to avoid truly difficult and potentially painful situations. It's just natural. It's natural, it's typical, and it's unfortunately all too common. But of course, eventually those weeks and those months turn into years, and we look back 30, 40, 50 years later wondering where the time went and what we've done with our lives. Not only that, but if you've never been truly tested in a variety of areas of your life, you never really know what you could have been or what you could have accomplished had you exposed your body, your mind, your ego to the elements, so to speak, to pressure or to a harder life, a chosen harder life. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that none of us have had or are having periods of our lives that aren't tough or a struggle. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm referring to consciously choosing to put oneself in uncomfortable positions or in uncomfortable, very difficult pressure situations in order to grow. But also, and this is an important concept, to put one's ego in check. Now, if you ask most people what life in the future would look like for them, they would describe something that is hopefully easier today, hopefully easier in the future than what life is today, meaning they'll talk about having more resources, meaning, money in the bank, investments, savings. They'll talk about having more time, retirement, of course, more enjoyment, maybe boats, cars, jet skis, travel, time with family. This is all stuff that people talk about in the future. People don't tend to hope that life is going to get harder each day. And one of the reasons we work, of course, is to have a better future than our past or our present, is it not? We work to make money. We hopefully save some of it. We invest some of it. We enjoy life a little today, but hopefully we have enough to rest and enjoy something later. And of course, we work to give our families that kind of life as well currently and support a particular lifestyle. By the way, I'm no different in that regard. I don't hope for a more difficult future than my present, or my past. What I mean by bringing the topic up is that most people kind of amble through life this way, right from the beginning of their kind of conscious and rational understanding that they have some choice in how life goes. Most will choose to move toward comfort and pleasure. This is human nature. We move toward comfort and pleasure and away from pain and discomfort. Of course, if you were to talk to any appraiser on any given day, by the way, you wouldn't know that because most of them talk and act as if they'd lost some kind of bet at some point and somehow ended up in the worst business ever, having to deal with the worst people ever. I don't know why. I don't know where that attitude comes from, but that is our industry. You'd get the impression that they're clearly forcing themselves to deal with an immense amount of pain and discomfort on a daily basis instead of moving toward pleasure. And the roots of that kind of attitude in the paradigm are exactly what I'm talking about, because our attitude and our personality are shaped by our life experiences. I've said the line before in other episodes that our personal reality is shaped by our personality and vice versa. Your personality is shaped by or created by your personal reality. In essence, we're the sum total of our life experiences, and how we remember those life experiences and the story we tell ourselves about those experiences has a big effect on how we see the world around us each moment of each day. It forms how we interpret the things we see and we hear. It determines if we see the glass half empty or half full, so to speak. And speaking of getting one's ego smashed, of course, my days living in the dojo back in Chicago were filled with constant, never-ending physical and mental training, traveling, setting up and teaching new Aikido clubs and dojos and satellite schools around Illinois, taking at least 4 hours of evening Aikido classes with the senior teachers and our main chief instructor, Mr. Toyota, each night. And then, of course, the live-in students, there was only 4 or 5 of us at any one time, would have to close up the school at the end of the night, clean the dojo, finish up the office work, and then cook for the rest of the live-in students and our teacher, Mr. Toyota. And this was typically between 10:30 and midnight on any given night. But it was at these late-night sessions with our teacher, our sensei, as he's called in Japanese martial arts, that meant the most for the live-in students, because we knew that we were part of an extremely small group of people, apprentices under an extremely intelligent, wise business person as well as an amazing martial artist, and we were having this wisdom imparted to us from somebody who was regarded by literally tens of thousands of people around the world as one of the greatest living Aikido and Zen teachers of our time. He was not only a master teacher of the specific form Rinzai Zen and Aikido, he was a great businessman who had built a martial arts empire that stretched around the world. He had his headquarter dojo was in Chicago, and then 200, almost 300 dojos around the world. He had people literally on a daily basis clamoring for his time and his acknowledgement. And we were the lucky ones getting to eat dinner, sip sake with him, and do this on an almost nightly basis. There were, of course, nights that he left the dojo early to go be with his family, but many nights he spent it with us, kind of imparting his experiences, doing the same thing in Japan, living in a dojo, living in a Zen monastery, going to law school, and basically keeping up this same grueling schedule for many years that we were doing now. And regardless of how exhausted we were by that point in the night, we never passed up the opportunity, because we knew it was something special. We knew it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we knew at some point it would pass. We wouldn't have that available to us. And we had chosen this particular life. We had chosen to give up everything, in a sense, to go learn and be the best Aikido instructors in the world, have this Zen concept and training imbued into us. And part of that idea, part of that training, part of that philosophy was to give up kind of all of your earthly pleasures, all of your belongings, more or less. We had very few things, and we were living very Spartan, all to take part in this program. This was not, you weren't expected to do this for a lifetime. You were expected to do it for a fairly short period of time, minimum 1 year, maximum 3, and then you were kind of kicked out into the world to go start your own dojo and carry on the same thing. But we knew that these were once-in-a-lifetime moments to have wisdom imparted upon us. And the thing about submitting yourself to that kind of unique training, especially under a Japanese teacher, and especially in martial arts and Zen, is that you've accepted that you're going to be treated harshly. That is the way of Eastern training. You're going to be spoken to pointedly. You're oftentimes going to be yelled at by the teacher. You're going to be singled out if you are a live-in student, especially, more than just the students who kind of came and went each day. They were treated much, much better. Those of us who were living in could not escape. We had signed up for this. We were paying for it, by the way. You're never going to get anything right. You're never going to be able to juggle all the responsibilities successfully. And quite simply, you're going to fail at a lot of things on a regular basis. And those of us whose egos were rooted in their, say, own self-importance while taking part in that kind of program were typically the ones who ended up breaking and quitting. And if you quit that particular live-in student program, by the way, you were out for good. You were kicked out. Mr. Toyota said, you've broken your commitment. Commitments are huge in Japanese culture, and so you're done. You're out. You're done with the dojo. You're done with normal daily training, never to come back as a regular student. You made a commitment to the program, and you're expected to finish at least that first year. But that was one of the main points of the program. One of the main points of the program was for the teacher to see what you were made of, to tax you, to push you, to beat you to some degree. And what he needed to expose within you so that your ego could be broken, could be exposed first. He could see what you were made of and where your pain points were and where you were weak. And usually where you were weak was where your ego was heavily invested. And then, of course, once it was exposed and broken, you could be rebuilt. And one of the main points, too, was for you, the student, to be tested on a daily basis with sometimes unsolvable tasks, unending training, an unmanageable schedule, a never-ending to-do list, and, of course, to find deeper and deeper reserves within to keep pushing ahead. This was the idea of continuously pushing. And the only way to make it through, the only way was to keep your ego in check. If your ego got in the way, you'd fail every time, and you'd fail quickly. And as a live-in student in that type of program, you were up at 5 or 6 every morning, ice-cold shower. They were called cold water ablutions. You'd have to get in the shower. You couldn't crank it up to high. You had to keep it on cold. And then there was another shower head in the same shower. You'd have to fill up with ice-cold water in a bucket and do these ice-cold water ablutions. If anybody's familiar, by the way, with the Wim Hof method, look into that. WIMHOF. Amazing, amazing program. But anyway, there was a point to the madness. We had morning meditation, usually 45 minutes of grueling, seated, cross-legged meditation. Morning Aikido class several days a week, dojo cleaning, lunchtime classes, giving to other students all day long, taking care of the teacher, teaching classes, cooking meals, running the dojo office, teaching more classes, taking classes from the senior students, getting your butt kicked because you're the one as the live-in student usually taking the falls for the instructor. And then, of course, ending the day late at night, still being pushed mentally and emotionally, like I just mentioned, cooking for the other live-in students and the instructor, ending basically every day after midnight and having to start it all again early the next morning meant it was completely up to you to figure out how to do it, how to get it done, and how to do it with your mouth shut and your attitude in check. There was no complaining about the schedule, the training, the physical beatings, the emotional treatment by the instructor, or the injuries. You know, your wrists were getting tweaked all the time, your ankles, your knees, the treatment by the sensei, the Spartan living conditions, the unending projects list, the travel, or anything else that we signed up for. Why? Because it was chosen. And we were reminded all the time that this was a choice. We could quit at any time. Having that in front of you every single day was a good reminder to essentially keep your ego in check, lest you let it kind of goad you into quitting in a moment of weakness. If anybody's familiar with the Navy SEALs, you see that they have this thing called the grinder. You can, at any time, you can walk up, ring the bell 3 times, take off your helmet, lay it on the ground, and you basically are saying, I'm done. I quit. This isn't for me. You have to do that, and they make you do that in front of everybody. So there's an emotional component. There's a public component to it. You can't quietly quit. And we had the same opportunity. We could essentially ring the bell 3 times and say, I'm done. This isn't for me. I'm out. And knowing you had that release valve, of course, was I would say it was actually, it made things more difficult. Because instead of saying, hey, you're in prison, there's no chance, there's no getting out, well, then you'd have no choice. But because we had a choice, we could ring the bell at any time, take off our uniform, our gi, so to speak, that's our helmet in this example, and say, I'm done, I quit. Well, your ego's tested even further. Because at any moment that you felt like you wanted to quit, you knew you could. And so you had to take a step further and say, nope, I'm not going to. And you see, my friends, one of the main reasons for putting oneself through that kind of experience is of course, to be pushed. That's why I chose it, to be pushed to your physical, your mental, and your emotional limits so that you could find your boundaries and then expand them, but also so that you would have a new paradigm through which to view your world. Now, we didn't necessarily know this at the time, by the way. These are insights I've gained over the last 25 plus or minus years since taking part in that type of program. We were there because we wanted to be the best Aikido instructors in the world and study under a true master of Zen and Aikido. What we got, however, was vastly more. What we left that kind of experience with was a new relative view of daily life that allowed us to put things into perspective because we lived with very little. We were taxed physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and yet we were asked always to find more, to do more, and to be more. And we chose that life. And the magic that happens when you take part in something like that is that you realize how much you can actually do when you simply tell your ego to shut up and sit down. It's your ego that tells you you can't do something. It's also your ego that tells you that somehow you're important. You're more important than you really are. And when you can tell your ego that it's wrong on both counts, amazing things start to happen because the true you can start to come out. Now, being the Zen master that Mr. Toyota was, he was constantly on the lookout for ways to teach each of us individually, each of the live-in students. And one of his favorite ways to do that was to look for weaknesses within each of us, each of the live-in students. One example would be maybe one of us was coming down with a cold, which of course in that environment is a sign of physical and mental breakdown in some way. Or maybe one of us had forgotten a key task in the dojo office or in the dojo cleaning or something, or to dust a particular picture frame somewhere. He was always on the lookout to catch us in some type of failure scenario. We were always being watched and tested for something we missed, which of course keeps your awareness on level 12. Now, instead of pointing it out in the moment when he noticed something, he would often wait to see how we were going to handle the rest of the tasks for the day, kind of always keeping it in his back pocket that he noticed this failure. And he wanted to see whether or not we would notice the forgotten task and fix it, dust the picture frame, or if our impending sickness or our failure would cause us to fall apart completely. And in fact, if he noticed these things before evening Aikido classes, you were in trouble. He would often use the class time and our role as the ones helping him demonstrate techniques to kind of push us even further, treat us especially harshly on the mats, and point out some of these weaknesses in somewhat cryptic ways while physically pounding on you during demonstrations. And he would say something during the demonstration of a technique that likely only you and the live-in students understood to be a reference to the missed office task, the dusty picture frame, or the student's obvious illness or cold coming on. And then he'd apply the technique rather dynamically to kind of make this point. And you associated his words and the pain of the technique with what you had missed. You knew in that instant that you had failed in some way again, and that the real lesson had just begun. The lesson being, of course, you're just not that good. You're not that important, and the world doesn't give a shit about your excuses or your complaints. The work either gets done or it doesn't, and as the Navy SEALs say, the only easy day was yesterday. Basically, give up your ego. Put it aside. Keep moving forward, because the only thing we have is this moment and the next moment. And then, of course, it was usually while sitting with him late that evening at dinner, at those all-important dinner meetings, that the topic of your failures that day would come up. Or he would point out, while somebody was preparing the meal, that somebody was starting to get sick, and then he would simply say, "Oh, that's too bad, Blaine," in his broken Japanese, his broken English, I mean. He'd say, "That's too bad, Blaine. You're just not that good. You're just not that good." And of course, this was a reminder to all of us to keep our egos in check. It was a constant daily reminder that we were all part of something bigger and that any one of us alone was not that important, and that the world, the universe, if you will, wasn't going to stop, and that it didn't care that we were tired, we were upset, we were run down, we were emotional, and our egos were getting in the way. If we were forgetting things during the day, missing office tasks, or even getting sick, we would be reminded that we just weren't that good. In fact, we would often be reminded with each one of those tasks that any one of those tasks could have been a life or death scenario. Meaning, if we missed an office task, he said, what if this was A, B, or C in your life, and you missed it, you failed? It could have meant life or death for you. Now, of course, a missed office task isn't life or death, but he wanted to get us to see how important not failing in those areas was. Of course, this is definitely a unique strategy of developing leaders, and a very Eastern one at that. But that's what we signed up for. And as we were taught every day in that program, egos are the one main reason people fail, companies fail, businesses disappear, people quit jobs, relationships end, and maybe even worse, people stagnate. It's your ego that makes you think you're more important in the grand scheme of things than you really are. It's your ego that makes you treat people in a certain way, typically less than you think they are. It's your ego that makes you falsely believe the world cares about your complaints. It doesn't. It's your ego that tells you very deceptively, by the way, that you're better than you really are. And in the grand scheme of things, you're not. Leaders who think they're more important than those who follow them, managers who think they're more important than the workers they manage, workers, of course, who think that they're more valuable than the tasks they're asked and paid to perform, those who think they're beyond question, those who think they have all the answers, those whose egos have fooled them into thinking there's something special in a world of 7 billion special people. I'm sorry, my friends, but you're just not that good. It's not to say that you're not good at what you do, but as soon as you start to believe that you're better at the thing than what that thing actually contributes to the world in the grand scheme of things, you've let your ego blind you. Whenever you find yourself getting upset at something in your business, remind yourself, you're just not that good. And you'll shift your mind toward how to be better. When you find yourself getting upset at a colleague, a coworker, or a client, remind yourself, you're not that good. You're not that important. And you'll find yourself looking for new ways to interact, maybe new ways to teach, maybe new ways to change the colleague, coworker, or client for the better. If you find yourself complaining about the industry, the AMCs, the lenders, the government, the regulations, the White House, the fees, and all the so-called skippies in your market, stupid word, by the way, get over yourself, man. You're not that good. In fact, if all you're doing is complaining about it, you're showing to the world that you're not that good because you're obviously not able to overcome all of the things that you're complaining about. And that's the point. In the grand scheme of things, you're just not that important. The world doesn't care about your complaints, and you're not so good that you don't need more work, more growth, more education, new perspectives, and new attitude. You see, the emphasis can be wherever you'd like it in that particular sentence, the sentence being, you're just not that good, man. But it's really meant to remind you that you're not good enough in any single situation to solve all of the problems ever. And of course, complaining about it does no good whatsoever. That's simply ego. And the thing about the appraisal industry specifically, and we all know this, for 90% of appraisers out there who are 1 or 2 person appraisal offices, there's no feedback. So anybody who is calling somebody else a skippy, anybody else whose ego has gotten the best of them and is talking down to somebody else, usually on social media where it's easy to do so, There's nobody else out there, there's nobody else out here who can confirm whether or not you're also one of those people. I mean, we're not going to see your appraisal reports. We're not going to kick open the doors of your office and look at how you produce appraisals. So you can call anybody you want to Skippy, and we wouldn't know if maybe you're that same person. Nobody knows, because we get no feedback, no peer reviews. If you are doing reviews, all the information is redacted. I don't get to see if it's your appraisal or not, so I'll never know. So just like every keyboard warrior out there, many appraisers are fond of jumping into forums and talking down to peers in their industry as if they are somehow better. But I got to tell you, in the grand scheme of things, even the good ones, you're just not that good. You're not good enough in any single situation to solve all of the problems ever. And my sensei was saying this phrase to remind us that regardless of how much we try to be the best at something, or worse, think we're the best at something or better than somebody else, maybe even just thinking we're really good at something, that's the moment of danger. That's the moment that our egos are about to blind us to opportunities. And maybe more important, to solutions, to unforeseen challenges and obstacles. That's the moment we stopped to complain or even contemplate a situation. It was already too late. We were told this on a daily basis. You have to think, it's too late. The point of training, by the way, we say this all the time in the defensive tactics community, the point of training is to close the gap between perception and response. Meaning the moment you perceive something, if you're well trained, there will be no gap between perceiving something and responding appropriately to that situation. And the whole point of training is to close the gap. When you're a beginner at something, the gap between perception and appropriate response is very large. If you think back to when you were a beginning appraiser, you don't know everything. You have questions. How do I respond to this particular scenario? We see it today in all the forums. People ask great questions. Hey guys, I need some help on this. Ran into this situation today. I inspected a house and here's what I saw. How do I handle this? And then of course, now today we can talk on those things because of the beauty of the internet. We can get feedback and we can have a bunch of people jumping in saying, well, here's how I've handled it in the past. Here's what you need to do. Here's how you need to remain USPAP compliant. And we can share that information. But basically what that person's question was saying was, my gap between perception and appropriate response is very wide. I need to learn more. And that is the point of training. The point of training, the point of constant education, the point of keeping your ego in check is to close the gap between perception and response. And when you're super, super good at anything, it's not just appraising or defensive tactics, there is, we would say, a hair's breadth between perception and response, almost imperceptible. Keeping your ego in check is super important. The moment you stop to complain, the moment you place your ego upon somebody else, the moment you stop to even contemplate some scenarios, it may be too late. Action and intention were always the words of the day in the dojo. It doesn't matter what it is, my friends. None of us is that good at what we do or who we are being in any given moment. You're just not that good that you can't humble yourself. You're not that good that you can't learn something new. You're not that good that you can't teach somebody something new. And you're not that good that you can solve every new problem or challenge that comes your way. You're also not that good, by the way, that you don't also deserve a little grace for not being able to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You're not supposed to. You're just not that good at it. And I mean that in the most loving yet humbling way possible. You're not supposed to carry the weight of the industry or the weight of the world on your shoulders. And for many of you, you show that by complaining, by breaking down, by denigrating other people in our industry. And again, I'll say it again, in the appraisal business specifically, one of the biggest drawbacks to the typical business model is that once you go off on your own, you have nobody telling you that you're just not that good anymore. And by that, I mean you don't have anybody keeping your ego in check. There's no feedback. Your mentor isn't there pushing you to grow and to be better, or correcting your work or catching your mistakes. You don't have anybody telling you to check your attitude and check your ego and look at things differently. You go out on your own, you get some business, you start completing some appraisals. And usually at that point, the only way to learn and grow is you have some revision requests from the lenders every now and then. And of course you complain about them. Oh, the stupid lenders, the AMCs, this isn't USPAP compliant and they can't ask me to do this. But in some cases, the revision requests are the only pressure you're getting to take another hard look at your reports. I'm not saying all revision requests are reasonable. I'm saying that quite often is the only pressure that we get to look at our appraisals deeper, to question things, to add commentary. And then you look at the commentary that they're requesting you add and you go, you know what? That actually makes this report more credible and less misleading, which is what our reports are supposed to be. But instead, we complain about them. In essence, we never have anybody anymore keeping us in check. And this business, for a large part of the appraiser population, is a limited feedback industry, a limited feedback business with almost zero leadership. I'm not saying there are no leaders in our industry. Don't mishear me. I'm saying that for most 1 to 3 person appraisal businesses, there is little to no ego checking going on and no solid leadership within each of those companies. I know the owner, the chief appraiser, the person running their business, thinks they're the leader, but running your own business, by the way, does not make you a leader. They're two separate things. You could be a good leader and also the business owner. But just being the business owner by default does not make you a good leader. You may think it does. It just makes you an independent business owner. And in fact, I hate to tell people this and burst many egos, but being an appraiser, an independent appraiser, isn't even considered a business by many accountants, investors, and true business owners. You might have an LLC. You might have some kind of business format created by your attorney. You may even have an office. But many of those true business owners consider an independent appraiser to simply be an independent service provider, or like a salesperson. You're an outside salesperson or an inside office worker. You have little to no equity in your business. You have nothing you can really sell. I know some appraisers have businesses built up and they have equity that they can sell, but it's very, very rare. You have nothing of substance that can be leveraged except your signature and your experience, of course, meaning the business is almost wholly dependent on you, the appraiser, the chief appraiser, to bring home the bacon each week. If you get sick or you break your leg, your arm gets cut off, the gravy train more or less stops. What am I saying? I'm saying that many of you have told yourself a story built by your ego and fed by your ego. It's a story that keeps telling you just how good you are in a world that simply doesn't understand or appreciate just how damn good you are, or how important you are in the grand scheme of things. They just don't get it, you say. Why do these damn clients keep asking me for these revisions, or to add these particular comments, or these sales, or and the ors go on and on and on. Those damn realtors, how dare they? These stupid lenders, they just don't get it. And I'm telling you, my friends, that is your ego getting in the way. Because without those damn realtors and without those stupid lenders, for all their faults and foibles, as if we have none, markets don't move. Without an appraiser, without a real estate agent selling a home, and without that buyer who just bought that home going to a lender to get a loan, appraisers don't work. In essence, I know. There's going to be some argument. Oh, I do all private work and it's divorces. And I get it. I'm talking about lender work, which is the bulk of appraising for most appraisers. Without those dumbass realtors and without those stupid lenders, you have no appraisal order. It doesn't mean you have to like them. It doesn't mean they're good. I'm not saying that. I'm saying put your ego in check. Put everything in proper perspective. You're no better than any one of them. The bottom line is you're simply not as good as you keep telling yourself every day. I mean, you could be a good appraiser. I don't know, and I never will know. Because again, all of your information is redacted when your appraisals come across my desk for review. And I see some good appraisals, and then I see some sloppy ones. And when I see sloppy ones, I don't go, oh, this is a skippy and I need to turn them in. No, I just go, this is somebody that could use some extra education. I sure wish I could see who this appraiser was, because I would call them, I would meet them for coffee, and we would talk about the business. And I know based on who I am and how I speak and the influence I can have, that I would help raise the education level and likely the fee level of that so-called skippy. Oh, I hate that word when I say it. It's so stupid. It makes us sound uneducated and ridiculous. So you could be a good appraiser. You're just not that good. Being good also means being able to handle all of the tasks and insight of being an appraiser in 2018, 2019, 2020 without complaining about them. You're a good appraiser. Okay, we'll give you that. You're listening to this podcast, you're a good appraiser. Good is subjective. We'll talk about that in another podcast. Good is subjective, but we'll say you're a good appraiser. We see that in the Facebook forums all the time. Oh, if you're on this forum, you're a good appraiser. No, we don't know that. You could be a horrible appraiser. And I see a bunch of horrible appraiser attitudes. So I don't know how, if our definition of good appraiser is some kind of subjective standard of how they complete actual reports. Okay, fine. Maybe 10 appraisers in a room could agree on some subjective standard. That if they do all of these things, if all of these things are met and all USPAP guidelines, but more than likely if 10 appraisers are in a room and they're all looking at each other's reports, some are going to get ripped apart. It's just the nature of what it is we do. So I don't necessarily know if calling somebody a good appraiser, I don't think anybody has agreed on a subjective standard for what good or what successful is, the definition. For me, good is tied up with how you run your business, how you complete appraisals, how you treat other people, how you speak to other people, the perspective you have, the insights you have, the attitude you have. And the definition of success for me entails how much you give back. To me, you cannot be successful just based on purely financial terms or how many appraisal reports you kick out, and none of that. I've been in business and I've owned too many businesses to use that as a metric. Success for me now, at the age I am and the business experience that I've had, most definitely entails, it's not solely based on this, but most definitely entails how much you give. What are you doing for your business, for your people, for your clients, for your colleagues, and for the industry? And if the answer is I just put out really good reports, okay, fine. That's our subjective standard for saying you're a good appraiser, I guess. But I'm not willing to say you're successful. So let's just agree you're a good appraiser. You're just not that good. That you can also accept you may have to develop some other skills. You're not so good that you're complete, you're done. It's over. You're good enough, nothing else to learn. Put your clipboard away. You've reached the pinnacle. No. Haven't met one yet, including myself. Skills like communication, marketing, website development, speaking skills, management of people, leadership, dealing professionally with complementary industries like realtors and lenders, business development skills. All this list can go on and on. You're just not that good. And when you can finally get to the point where you can say to yourself and understand it, I mean truly understand it, then you're likely on the precipice of a personal and business explosion of epic proportions because you've successfully put your ego in check. Almost every martial arts dojo I've ever been in has a sign or a poster somewhere that says something like, check your ego at the door. Some variety or variation on that theme. And if every appraiser office had a similar sign, we'd likely be much further ahead as an industry. Unfortunately, they don't, which means the egos run rampant and the opportunities for many are lost to those who have checked their egos at the door. And the irony at the same time of this recording in 2018 is that there are a bunch of other industries looking at appraisers and saying, sorry, but you're just not that good. We can probably do without you. And if it's a choice of using technology over an asshole, if it's a choice of using big data and advances in technology over somebody with an attitude who looks down upon them and talks down to them all the time and denigrates them in forums, can you blame them for wanting to use technology and big data? Can you blame any one of them for thinking that they might be better than you? They may not be a better appraiser, but in many ways, they're better than you because they don't talk down to you. They don't look down upon you. They look down upon your attitude. And many of those industries are the ones who currently pay us to do what we do. It's only when we can say to ourselves, you're just not that good, and you put your ego in check, that new questions get asked, new answers emerge, new partnerships evolve, new coalitions are created, and new opportunities appear. Take control of your personal and professional future, my friends. Every now and then remind yourselves, like Toyota Sensei reminded me, you're not that good. And the world simply doesn't give a shit about you and your fears, your concerns, your complaints, who you hate, who's stupid. And it certainly doesn't care about your tears. And then once you've wiped your tears away, call up a real estate agent, meet him for coffee. Call up a new local lender and take them to lunch. Schedule a lunch and learn workshop and teach a bunch of those folks what it is you do and how you do it. Send out some thank you cards to 5 of your past clients. Reach out to an appraiser in your town whom you've never met and meet him for beers. Maybe it's that low-baller, form-filling jackass Skippy you seem to know so much about but have never, ever met. Meaning you'll never have a positive effect on that individual. You're just going to rip them apart in forums without knowing anything about them and why they do what they do. You'll have no influence on them whatsoever. Who knows? When you put your ego in check, you may just learn something. You may also have the opportunity to teach somebody something along the way. What I do know for sure is that opportunity exposes itself to those with eyes to see it, ears to hear it, attitudes and egos willing to accept it. That's it for me, my friends. I want to thank you for listening to the Real Value Podcast. There is bonus content for this episode, by the way. The only way to get the bonus content, of course, is to go over to realvaluecast.com or to my website, realvaluegroup.com. It's my appraiser website. And so if you're interested in hearing a little more about how meditation can help keep your ego in check and your blood pressure down, head over to realvaluecast.com. Let us know which email you'd like us to send it to, and I'll send it to you personally. I also answer every email sent to me personally, I, of course, love the interaction. So thanks to those of you who have sent such nice emails, asked awesome questions, and offered your thoughts on the topics talked about here. I really appreciate it. Please keep them coming. Thanks again for listening. We'll chat again next week, my friends. I'm out.